Hey everyone, welcome and thanks for joining. I am Diana White. I'm the Director of Programs and Events at the Producers Guild, and I'm honored to welcome you to this special PGA conversation with the creative team behind A Friend of the Family. Joining us, we have showrunner, executive producer, and writer Nick Antosca, producer Jan Broberg, and actor Jake Lacey. Before we get started, I'd like to say a special thank you to Peacock for making this panel possible. Leading this conversation, I'm pleased to welcome Steve Green. Steve is the associate TV editor at IndieWire, and in his decade plus at the site, he's been a part of their nationwide festival coverage and has written about TV, film, podcasts, music, and theater. Thank you, Steve. Take it away.
Thank you, Diana. I really appreciate it. And thank you to all the three of you for joining us for this conversation. I really appreciate it. As a way to start off, I think maybe we can start right at the very beginning of the series. Jan, you had a chance to introduce this show yourself. How important was it for you to do that and to be able to say what you did in the way that you did?
It was extremely important to me and not something that had been decided like in some contract somewhere. It happened along the way that, Nick and other directors, producers, executives at Peacock, how do we make sure that people will watch the whole thing because they're not turned off by, oh, there's going to be something gratuitous or graphic or maybe it ends too sad. Because I have people in my life that have said, oh, it's hard for me to watch your story or read your book because I love you so much. And I figured a lot of other people would maybe feel that way about taking a subject that's so important to understand, but so hard to wrap your head around or to watch it. So for me to do that so that people would know it has a happy ending, I'm here and I'm trying to be that voice and that advocate and open up that possibility for others to share their stories and maybe ultimately to prevent such child abuse was hugely important for me because that's my long game, a foundation that I've started, a podcast that I have of other survivor stories, and the book that we just newly released a new book on Amazon. And it's the long game of playing for change that mattered to me. So being able to do that was hugely important.
Yeah. And then once we get into that first episode, it seems like there's a question for Nick, but if anyone wants to talk about this, it seems like when you're adapting a story like this, one of the first choices you have to make is how much you want to align the audience with what the characters know. And I'm curious, how did you talk about that in the writer's room about what to keep a mystery and what not, and what to sort of save for later episodes?
Well, we always knew going into this that it wasn't a story about big reveals or about the shocking headlines, that it was a story about human beings, what they were experiencing, what they were feeling, and understanding psychologically how something so unthinkable happened. So we talked about it in terms of exploring each character and their journeys and going on the experience with them, even if we know that it's going to be a very painful, disturbing, and frightening journey. And of course, you depend so much on both the insight that we got from working with Jan and with her family, and you depend so much on the cast. It's a leap of faith in every direction for everybody who's involved in the show. So even from the very beginning, the first conversations in the writer's room, it was always about like character psychology and empathy.
Mm-hmm. And I guess to that point, the psychology and empathy for Jake, it seems like part of this process was approaching B as a bunch of different characters rather than just one person who sort of had all these sides to him.
I think the best that I can maybe, dovetail into that is that in the way that B was sort of built out in this telling and the way that I came to him or maybe found was necessary was that I think there are times where he believes he is in love with Jan and they are meant to be together. And there are times where she is purely an object to be taken, and he's either convincing himself or others that he's in love with her and they are meant to be together. And then there's times where he's consciously manipulating circumstances and people to get his way. And I think, you know, in my artistic assumption and creativity, because, you know, we thankfully don't have him to speak with, I think his own understanding as to where he fell at certain moments in those pieces is a little gray, you know, that it was ebbing and flowing as to which version was true for him in that moment, from scene to scene, from you know, week to week. So there was a lot of just trying to fulfill exactly what was happening in front of us, for me at least, and going piecemeal, partially because, you know, trying to bite off too much at once would have just been futile. And also because of sort of what we're talking about, where there's like a constant shape shifting as the circumstances required for him to like take up ever more space and continue to plow forward.
And I will say, when I talk about empathy and understanding the characters, we never came into this going like, well, we want to empathize with even Berchtold as well. We want to understand.
Right.
It's like we understood that he's a psychopath, he's a predator. That doesn't mean you can't sort of dig into, like, we had recordings of his voices and letters that he wrote and parts of his memoir that he wrote, and all that was really, I think, valuable in the writer's room, and in terms of understanding the story that he was telling himself about what he was doing, and the story that he wanted to present to the world about, you know, how he saw himself and what he was doing, and understanding that what he was doing was monstrous. We weren't going to try and sort of empathize with his love story, but we were going to try and portray the tactics that he used to conceal the monstrous thing that he was doing, perhaps even from himself.
Mm-hmm. And it does seem like there's a balance in the show between showing how people saw him versus who he sort of quote unquote is in any given moment.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
that's part of the casting too. It's like you have to have somebody who can convince, who you can believe can manipulate this family and get in so deep into their psyche, and use these tactics successfully. And of course, Jan, you know, is the expert on what he did and what that was like.
It's really interesting. I have to say, like, those three things that Jake pointed out, it's like a triple play in baseball. It's like if you can have all three of those basically within each character that you're trying to manipulate with, you know, it's different tactics with mom, then dad, then Jan, then the neighborhood, then the congregation, everything, you know, then his own wife and his children, who also were used as pawns. So I think it's so interesting that he put it that way, that Jake said it like that, because I've just been going through a box of stuff, and this is a little Easter egg that they don't have because I just found this. I found a card that Berchtold sent to my dad in 1976. I wish I had brought it with me. And it's just this little thing, like sometimes you meet a friend that you know you love and you admire, and sometimes that friend reveals who you are to yourself. You get both things. And inside the card, all it has is his signature, B, and then it says, "I was just thinking about you today." It was sent to him in May of 1976.
Oh, that's so much later than the first kidnapping.
Oh my gosh, it's right
Wow.
before the second kidnapping, like 4 months. This is May, June, July, August, 3
Yeah.
months before he takes me the second time. I
That's
mean, I
wild.
got chills. It was in the side of one of my mom's. I'm going through all of her stuff and trying to get rid of things. And I'm like, oh my gosh, here it is. Here he is, still trying.
Because Bob
My
was
dad hasn't let him in
so
the house for a year
against
and
him
a
by
half.
then.
What?
Because Bob was so set against him at that point. I mean,
Oh,
he
totally. Yeah, there was no relationship going to happen ever again with him. And I just found that amazing. I'm like, where has this been all these years? And I have it in the envelope with the postage stamp, and it's May 1976.
we kept finding things in the research and in all the stuff that Jan gave us and that we had in the FBI
Wow.
reports and everything, where just when you thought you had gotten to the end of like the depths of how manipulative he was, you find or see something that is so mind-boggling, like the shamelessness and the relentlessness. And so by the time you get to, episode 7 and 8, and he's saying, oh yeah, me and President Jerry, it's like
My best friend.
Jake was like, this is ridiculous. Like, it's too much. I'm like, he said it. That's what he did.
I was like,
Testify of it in court. This is what he told us.
I was like, I get that we're trying to, position him as being sort of very confident and comfortable in his cover story as, working for the CIA but calling President Ford Jerry, and is that really? Nick was like, this is what it is, man. Like, this is the truth. Like, this isn't some little added thing to like spice it up. The guy's going around telling people he's close to Jerry Ford. Like,
Yeah.
that's it. Which, as an actor, knowing all of this is true, makes it so easy in a way to like give over to doing it, where you're not left going like, I see what they're trying to do to create a narrative thing and attention, and like, all right, we'll try to piece together some organic thing. To just go like, give over, man. It's all real. It's all true. It's all there. It's like,
we didn't together. Nothing was embellished. It was, if anything, having to combine things to fit it all in, having to combine characters, but there's nothing in it that's not true.
right.
Yeah, if we get questions, like Jen and I on the panel in Austin just recently, it was like, how much is and it's like, for the most part, we pull back on stuff because it was so mind-blowing. You'd sort of be like, that couldn't have. And also just even in the dialogue, so much of the dialogue is taken from actual phone calls, actual recordings. And we very much wanted it to not seem like a caricature of the 70s. And at certain points, they're on the phone calls, they're saying like, oh, fiddlesticks and stuff like that. So we had to kind of ride a tightrope of like the real dialogue and also not seeming like we were going over the top with, the idiom of the 70s in Pocatello.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like this is a process where, like you said, you're discovering things and you never sort of are able to fully wrap your head around everything. But I guess for all three of you in this process, was there something early on that kind of locked in, that helped you get your footing, that helped you, I guess for Jan, sort of build that trust, for Nick, like a detail that you were able to sort of latch onto, and Jake, a story or a detail that you were able to sort of take with your part going forward?
For me, it really started with the very first phone call from that. I was standing right here in this living room, and it was Nick and Alex Headland on the other line. And the first words basically out of Nick's mouth were, how are you? And how are your parents? And there was such sincerity. And I don't think he'd even decided if this was a story that had any more life to be told at that moment. But the sincere concern was so huge for me, because I was completely unprepared that people would point their finger and blame my parents. I have the most wonderful parents who we all decided as a family that we were ready to tell the story transparently and to be exposed to all of our, my parents call those the worst mistakes they ever made in their life. And how could I have not known or not seen? But I knew there are millions and millions and millions of people in this same situation. You're not being abused by a stranger. You're being abused sexually by someone you know, that you love already, that you trust. So you're not seeing it. And groomers, predators are master manipulators. They're called that for a reason. They're masterful. And I was completely unprepared for that to happen to my parents. And I couldn't stand the idea that this was their legacy. The people who were the most honest because they thought it might help somebody. We decided to do this, as a united front. I would have told the full story sooner, but my sister Karen and my dad weren't quite ready. And so it took a couple more years before we were like, okay, we're all ready. We can handle it no matter what. But I didn't know it would happen like that. So for me, it was that immediate concern. And then Alex and Nick came to my home. They flew out here. They saw me in Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. I played Martha in this play. We went hiking in the mountains. We did all this great stuff. Oh, I took them to church. Are you kidding? Walking into a Mormon church with I had another friend that was here and who's also a producer from a talk show. And all three of them walk in their black button down, and their black jeans and their high top black tennis shoes. And I march them right up to the front row, and happens to be a testimony meeting. So I'm like, oh no, this is going to be bad. So I get up and I say, this is why I'm glad I was raised a Mormon girl. And I say all the most important things about being a Christian and Mormon instead of all the weird stuff. Because I walk up and I'm like, everybody be nice. They're trying to help me tell my story. So when you get up here, be smart. And it was so cool. And so, they took the extra mile as we made, plans to hopefully, make this story happen. And I knew they wanted to do it right. And I knew they cared about the human beings that actually were involved and that it really happened to us, so that was awesome.
By the time we got on that phone call and we made that phone call to you, Jan, I knew that it was a story that I really wanted to tell or help tell, but only if you guys were okay and if you wanted to be part of it. Because, seeing you in the documentary, knowing that you were actively talking about your story and had processed the trauma, it didn't feel like a story that would be right to tell without that partnership. So that, that was the intention behind those questions and that call is, how are you guys doing? Like, how are the Brobergs right now? And it's interesting what you say, but the reaction to the documentary and to hearing the story that people have, in the writer's room, we talked to a woman named Dr. Anna Salter, who wrote a book called Predators and is an expert on these types of people and cases. And she said, and I'm paraphrasing here because it was more than a year ago, but this was the impression it had made on me. She said something effectively, were you surprised when you heard this story that the family kept letting him in? They made these choices. And I and the writers said, well, yeah, the first time you see it, of course, like you're surprised. And she said, well, I wasn't, because I know so many of these stories where, that is the nature of a sociopath like this and a predator like this. They're able to find the victims, find the vulnerabilities and exploit them over time. And she tells this anecdote about somebody who had a childhood trauma with a friend's father, and this woman was telling a story and said something effective, and if so-and-so walked back in the door today and she expected the person to continue the sentence, like, I would punch him in the face or I would whatever. And she said, I would be happy to see him, just because people retain the feelings that the predator impressed upon them, even when they know how bad it was. So anyway, but to go back and answer your question of what was the thing that locked in, for me, from a storytelling point of view, it was the chronology of the day of the kidnapping, which is the first episode. Because when I had the research, when I had all the stuff that Jan had given us, and when I had the FBI reports, and I was able to go through hour by hour and see what he did on that day and the order of the phone calls he made, and how he made a phone call to Marianne, who said yes, and then or he made a phone call to Bob, who said no, and then he triangulated them against each other. That made it click into my head how methodical this was and what the tactics were. And for whatever reason, that's what gave me the way in from a writing perspective.
I think, I'm kind of like often a silo of like, it's not my story, nor am I creating it, like I'm only fulfilling this. And so there was some preliminary work before even arriving on set that I think kind of opened doors in a way for me. And I think two big separate, maybe three, but I'll keep them brief, was the note that Jan wrote, to the cast members individually. But for me, like, I didn't know I needed this permission of ownership and freedom to tell the story or be a part of it as best I could, and Jan wrote a bit about Berchtold and his sort of superpower of charm and graciousness and storytelling and making you feel so unique in his orbit. And then the back half saying, like, I'm living a healthy, fulfilling, like, life, and you don't have to hold two priorities at once to, like, tell this story and be worried about me. Like, I'm great, and I'm here on the sidelines, like, championing what you're doing. And I didn't know I needed that, but desperately did. And so that really, like, opened like, took a weight off to say, like, you're right for this. There's a reason you're here, and I'm rooting for you. And I think meeting Hendrix, who plays young Jan, there's like you can, like, as an actor, do all the preparation in the world, and then when you meet her and she has such a light in her, and you see, like, oh, this is what he was after, that's like an organic, like, thing that is just innate to Jan and also to Hendrix, and a thing that you just can't manufacture, and that there's, like, a human response to that thing. And the final piece, was I think maybe in the second episode, Rachel Goldberg was directing, and Marianne comes to my motorhome, and there's like 7 tactics to get her back into my control in about 6 minutes, and it's like 4 a.m, and we'd shot this a number of times, and Nick and Rachel were like, it seems good, like, how you feeling? And I was like, it does not feel good. This does not feel like we're fulfilling this scene, like, it doesn't, me feeling good about a scene doesn't mean the scene's going well, but it just doesn't feel like we're hitting the thing, and Nick was like, I think you're looking for there to be a, like, human organic link from one tactic to the next, and there's not going to be, because he is devoid of the human experience that you or I would have in attempting to get a person on our side. He is shamelessly hitting her with, like, guilt and shame, and then intimacy, and then bringing up Jan, and then talking about their future and talking about the past, and like, trying to care for her in the moment, all these things just back to back to back to back to back. And that awareness of thinking, like, oh, I should in no way be working from myself for this character. Like, this is an entirely separate thing and needs to be addressed on his terms and not mine, and that, I think, also kind of gave another freedom to the other 6 episodes following that, in really just, like, giving over to exactly what he's doing without a qualification to the story or to the performance.
And that was a wild day. I think that was the longest day of our shoot. It was like 4 or 5 in the morning, out in the woods. And Jan and her mom were there that night, watching the scene in which they begin the affair, in which her mom begins to have the affair with Berchtold, which is so intense. And I just remember your mom there, Jan, Marianne, like, watching and kind of, like, riveted. And so that was very, that was the apotheosis of the fear that I had of, like, oh my God, like, are we going to do justice to this? Are we going to, are they going to be okay with the story we're telling? And Jan was there, and they gave a couple of notes on that scene, which were so valuable. And when I watch the scene now and watch how Marianne reacts to his advances, I'm like, oh, thank God they said that. Thank God that they gave her that extra moment of hesitation or pulling back and the push-pull. So that is a perfect example of, how the intense involvement benefited the project immeasurably, and was essential to telling the story.
And I just have to tell an Easter egg here too. So we're sitting here, my mom, okay, it's done. And both of us, we get back, that night to the hotel. I'm like, Mom, are you okay? And she's like, well, yes, you can see how charming he was. Because, Jake is so charming. So then we're done. We're home when, everything's in the can. We've gone to the premiere. We're watching the series on TV. So like about 2 weeks ago, we've now got, I think 6, maybe even the 7th episode. And Mom usually is outside all day long. She likes to cut the rose bushes, but she comes in now frequently because she wants to sit down and, let's play the series again. So she watches it over and over again. And I'm still, I got things to do. And, I'm going to watch it again. With her, And so I go in there and I'm like, Mom, can I get you some soup? Can I get you something to eat? She's like, oh, no. She said, you can see why I fell in love with him. Oh my word, Marianne, she didn't have a chance. He's so cute. He's so charming. He's so adorable. He's so convincing. Oh, I just love him. Not that I love Birchtold, but I love him. She's talking about Jake. And I truly, the way into Jake, he wasn't maybe as big a star as he is now, but Nick sent me this thing, watch White Lotus. And I did. I mean, this is what we think we're trying to get this guy. And I watch and I'm like, oh my gosh, this guy is the perfect asshole. He's perfect. Yes. And it's true. If these 3 elements, if the writing hadn't been so spot on, I never thought someone could write the psychology of this. I never thought someone could tell my story, but I didn't have a genius writer in my life at that time, like Nick and the team. That was amazing. And then to have an actor who could so fully submit to what he just said, the tactics and that it wasn't him, it was who this person was. And some even beyond the letter and giving him permission or whatever, it really was something in addition to that genius of being a really phenomenal actor that could bring something that I didn't think was possible. So, and then to have my own voice heard and listened to and be able to consult in the writer's room with the actors a little bit on the side to a director or to Nick or whatever, it was just so important. And it's so right, it's so real. It's why in the 2nd episode, I almost had to turn it off. And because I was so angry at Birchtold. I was so angry when he's reiterating the story to Hendrix, to me, and she's so scared and she's just crying. And I'm like, this guy, this kind of behavior that adults can manipulate fear and love at the same time. My feelings for him were genuine. I loved him. He was like my favorite uncle. Like I would have, if my dad had died, we would have, I liked his son, Jerry. That's what I write about in my journal. Jerry, his oldest son, Jasper in the show, but, holding my hand at a family home evening, and I'm like, oh, and going on a bike ride with him and him swinging me on the swings at the park. And I was so furious. I just got furious. And I'm like, this is not something that happened in the 70s. This is happening everywhere, every day, all over the world. And I got to put a stop to it. I was just so angry with him.
That moment that you talk about when she's crying and when you almost had to turn it off was one of the few moments shooting the show where I got really got chills or got uncomfortable and almost kind of had to step away from set from in the RV when he's talking to her and telling her about the aliens, and it's just, you just see her falling into the trap and it's like, oh my God. And then another one was in the finale when we were shooting the POV shot of what she's remembering of the skylight.
Mhm.
He just starts to come into the side. And Lauren Wolkstein, who directed the finale, is a brilliant director, and I were sitting at the monitor very close to Jake, and it's just it's a very simple shot. You know, it's nothing graphic or but just being in your, you know, young Jan's point of view, and in her mind's eye as a memory starts to form, like I had to step out of the RV and just kind of like shake it off. And there were a few moments like that where you just are reminded, like, God, this happened. This was done to a person. This was done to a child. It was, you know, there were moments like that throughout. And of course, talking to Jan almost every day, you know, that's valuable for all the concrete reasons we talked about, but it's also valuable because it's a reminder that you carry with you that this happened, and it happened to somebody who lived the story and carries it with them every second.
Yeah, thanks. And it is true that for me, that looking at Hendrix was really like looking at me. She looks so much like me, and her little brightness that Jake talked about when he met her, and all of that, to see that brightness going into that desperate fear, and then how McKenna carried it forward into a more teenage, nuanced. I have 10 layers in my brain going on right now.
Mhm.
I'm becoming a teenager for real,
Right.
you know, and then, but I'm brainwashed, but I love my parents, but I can't have a relationship with my dad, but I love B. I know that that's the right thing to do, and that makes it all okay, but I hate what's happening. I want this to be over. Susan can't get kidnapped, da 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 da. You know, it's like, to see the actors be able to take all that nuance forward throughout the piece, and for the writing to support every bit of it, it only emboldens me to move forward, even though sometimes I do get overwhelmed, or I get scared, or I think, well, who am I to think that I can make a difference, you know, because this is 3 out of 10 kids. This is 2 girls and 1 boy out of 10 that are right now in 2022 being sexually abused by someone they know, not a scary stranger situation. And so there's so much relatable here, because every one of them who is not telling is either scared or rewarded, or both at the same time. It's how it works. And so, yeah, it's pretty remarkable.
Yeah, and I feel like that's something that comes across in the show, the idea that that very few people involved even had the language and the words to describe what was happening. And I given what you just said, Jan, I feel like that's one of the things that that the show focuses on so well, is that there has been a shift, and that there has been, you know, from a modern perspective, we are able to put terms and labels and things on, and to be able to sort of talk about this in a way that wasn't possible back when this all happened.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, I hope it starts millions and millions and billions of conversations around the whole world, because that's where it starts. You can't take care of something that's kept in secret, that families and congregations and communities sweep under the rug, and sports teams and everybody else that keeps sweeping things, and superstars that don't get convicted because they blame the parents instead. You can't make a change if this is the rape culture that we're going to continue to live in, and we're talking rape of children. So I am on fire about the whole, you have to start with believing people who are now adults, who want to tell their story, not blaming them, and truly listening to, how do we now do this? How do you put grandpa in jail when you find out? What do you do? It's really a complicated subject, but it's real. And people now, I hope, have that permission in a way, just like the same thing we were talking about, to actually go, oh, I have words. I can tell. Maybe someone will believe me this time. When I was 15 and tried to tell my mom, she said, oh, you make a big deal out of everything, or, oh, we don't talk about that, because that's what happens. You know, I know the next little girl that he raped. I interviewed her, and that's on, you know, the Peacock documentary that's coming out the week after. And to hear her talk about it was so validating and so horrible and horrific, because I'm like, there it is. Serial predators. On it goes.
And some people who are watching this have seen the whole series. Some people have maybe not started it yet. So answer this in whatever way you would like, and however much detail you'd like. But I guess as a way to wrap up this conversation, what were the things that you wanted people to take away from the last episode? People have watched all 9. Were there particular ideas or particular feelings or emotions or moments that you were hoping that people would take away from once they've actually finished the season?
I think that the story is sort of fundamentally horrifying and disturbing and haunting, but the more you get into it and the more you get under the surface, the more relatably human it is, because we all have vulnerabilities that can be exploited. And as horrifying as the story is, it's also a story of a family overcoming something, and a family returning to each other, loving, forgiving. That's one reason I felt an urgency about telling it, and felt that we could sort of get through the darkness. But I hope that people come away having had an immersive human experience, and not just kind of dwelling on the sensational aspects, and they come out of it, feeling all the complexity of what happened.
Mhm. What I wanted, 3 things, which it accomplished completely for me, is first of all, there is hope. Again, I have a foundation now that the whole crux is to first and foremost bring healing and hope to the survivors so they can thrive in their life. And then through the series, through the book, through the podcast series of telling other survivor stories, that we get to know and become aware of how common this is, so that we start to see the subtle signs. They're not red flags. So there's that, the awareness piece will happen. The second thing is that it's not a scary stranger. It is someone you know. That is so important, because that is the conversation no one wants to have. Even if you have a little moment where you have this spidey sense like something's off or wrong, I call it the secondary thought. What's next? Oh, that's impossible. That guy got Teacher of the Year last year. These are all true stories. That guy is the leading attorney in my town. That guy's my bishop, my priest. That woman is she's been doing the daycare thing for like 25 years. She has all these, this business, these awards. That's the favorite sports coach. Oh my gosh, that's the USA Gymnastics doctor. Oh, I'm not looking. Even if I have a little thing, there's an excuse. Stop doing that. Keep your antenna up. I want people to have trusting, loving relationships in their life. You can't have a happy life without them. That requires some healing. It requires some discernment. It requires somebody taking your hand and telling you what to do. That's why people need legal advice. How do you go forward? And they need therapists that are affordable or online or on our online community. They have to have a community of support. Like AA needs each other and Al-Anon needs each other. We need that. And that's what I'm starting. So there's that. So the last thing is that when you look, the third thing really is when you do look and you think something is off, please go to the right source to know what to do next. Don't confront the person. You're outmatched. You're outmatched. Your person is someone you know, and you're outmatched. You have to go to somebody else that will help you on the process of what to do next. It's so complex.
Well, Jan, Nick, Jake, thank you so much for talking about the series. It's available to stream now on Peacock. And if you haven't,
Jake did.
Yeah, Jake, say
the last
something. We'll give you 2 minutes.
The only thing I want to say is I again, like, I'm not creating this, nor is it my story, and so I'm really just hoping, along the way from start until now, in support of it, to be telling the story as honestly and truthfully and with as much compassion as we could. And it felt like, you're taking a gamble all the time when you jump into a project, no matter what, position you hold in that cast or crew. And I think we got so lucky feeling like everybody was pulling in the same direction to fulfill Nick's vision and to accomplish Jan's intentions here. And there's a lot of talk in the arts, about like now more than ever we need, and I only think that's kind of true sometimes. You're like, no, we need lawmakers to make better policies, and I don't know if we need another story about XYZ, but it's just an honor to be a part of something that I do think we actually need, and that you hope like does make a difference, or that people see themselves in, hopefully. So yeah, I hope we did right by Jan. Is my hope,
For sure.
Yeah,
I couldn't
Great.
be happier.
thank you.
I mean, it's weird to say it's so entertaining when it's this kind of a story, but it's so compelling. And it does exactly what I wanted. It draws the audience in, and hopefully one of the characters they will relate to, and they will, I believe they will, and that will make this the ripple effect that needs to happen for change to happen, to
Yeah.
take a deeper dive into why does this continue. It's not acceptable. So thank you for helping me get the point across. I couldn't be more happy. I just really had no idea. That first trip to Atlanta, when I'm like, oh, they're building the interiors here, but oh, they're gonna punch a picture window in this brick house out here in Smyrna, Georgia, because they want it to look more like my real house. Who would know? No one would care. But they wanted to do it all right. And I was just like so overwhelmed. I'm like, oh, they really want it right. And it is. It's why it's almost hard for me to watch, but in a good way.
Yeah,
It's great.
that's wonderful.
Thanks, you guys.
Well, thank you to the three of you for taking the time to talk about the show. And for anyone watching, thank you for taking the time to listen to all this conversation. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
Thanks, Steve, man. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Steve.